Imagine, if you will, sitting in a clinical office. Just picture it. You've got a patient who is trying to explain their daily experience to a psychiatrist.
Right, a typical intake session.
Exactly. And they describe this moment from their week. It's something like, a slightly delayed text message from a friend. Or maybe their boss just looked at them with this, I don't know, this flat expression during a Tuesday meeting.
Which to most people are total micro events.
Completely. They're nothings. But this patient, they describe the aftermath by saying they literally physically hunched over. Like they grabbed their chest.
Wow.
Yeah. They tell the doctor they felt this sudden, just concussive wave of agony so profound they actually thought they were going to be sick.
That is intense.
Right. And they describe this instantaneous plunge into a dark, bottomless well of absolute isolation, genuinely convinced that everyone they love has just realized they are a fraud and abandoned them. And the kicker is, they're explaining this to the doctor while still visibly trembling.
I mean, hearing that, it sounds like a severe trauma response, right? Like an active flashback to a catastrophic, life-altering event.
It totally does. But then you zoom out and you realize that for a massive, massive segment of the population, there is no single inciting incident. This isn't some rare, isolated psychiatric anomaly, this invisible chest-clutching agony. That is the daily operating system for millions of people.
It's exhausting just to think about.
It really is. So welcome to this deep dive. Whether you are navigating the world with an ADHD diagnosis or, whether you're trying to understand a partner or a child who does, or even if you, the learner, are just fascinated by the hidden mechanics of the human nervous system, this exploration is going to fundamentally rewire how you view human behavior.
Absolutely.
Because today's mission is decoding this concept called Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, or RSD.
And I think we really need to emphasize that the paradigm shift here just cannot be overstated. I mean, for the better part of a century, the medical community, educators, society at large, they've all viewed ADHD through this incredibly narrow, externalized lens.
Right, like how it affects other people.
Exactly. We look at the observable behaviors. The fidgeting child in the classroom, the disorganized coworker, the constant lost keys, the inability to sit quietly. We have essentially treated ADHD as a behavioral nuisance.
A nuisance for the neurotypical world?
Yes.
Yeah.
But Dr. William Dodson, the psychiatrist whose foundational work and interviews form our source material today, he forces the camera to turn inward. He completely bypasses the external annoyance of ADHD and shines a floodlight on the profound internal emotional hurricane that is actually driving the ship.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Dodson's perspective, it's grounded in the trenches of actual clinical practice, right?
Oh, heavily. We aren't looking at theoretical models built by researchers who, only see patients in controlled, sterile studies.
No clipboards and stopwatches here.
Right. Dodson listened to thousands upon thousands of adult patients over decades. And this truly bizarre phenomenon started happening.
How was it?
Well, these patients, who had never met each other, who spanned totally different ages and demographics and backgrounds, they were coming into his office and using the exact same metaphor.
Like verbatim.
Almost verbatim.
Yep.
The exact same frantic vocabulary to describe an emotional pain that just wasn't in any modern diagnostic manual.
They were basically describing a neurological glitch that effectively hijacks the brain's survival hardware. But to understand how we actually got to the term RSD, we kind of have to rewind to some surprisingly old psychiatric observations, don't we?
Yeah, we do. Dodson realized that the modern sanitized version of ADHD in the DSM was missing something that older generations of doctors actually caught on to. He looked back at research on what was once called treatment-resistant depression.
Oh, right. Specifically the work of Paul Winder and Frederick Reimer out in Utah.
The Utah criteria. Exactly.
Just side note, this was back in an era when psychiatry was still using wildly archaic, frankly insulting terminology, like they called it minimal brain dysfunction to describe neurodivergence, which is just...
It's terrible.
Right.
But despite the terminology, Winder and Reimer sat with these hyperactive children and adults, and they documented a pattern. It was a pattern of intense, rapid cycling mood crashes.
And it looked like depression, but it didn't act like depression.
Right, because standard depression is, it's a slow descent into a dark room.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes weeks, sometimes months, to climb out of it.
But the Utah researchers noticed these patients were experiencing something entirely different. It was this sudden, violent, emotional implosion triggered by their environment.
And it could vanish just as quickly as it arrived.
Boom, gone.
Exactly. So Dodson saw the straight line connecting Wiener and Reimer's old observations to the weeping patient sitting on his couch in the present day.
Which brings us to the actual definition of what he coined, rejection sensitive dysphoria. So what exactly is it?
RSD is an exquisite, agonizing sensitivity to the perception. And perception is key there. The perception that someone has withdrawn their love, approval, or respect.
Yeah, that word perception is totally the linchpin. Because the withdrawal of love doesn't have to be objectively real, right?
Not at all.
Like the friend who sent the delayed text, they might literally just be driving through a tunnel.
Or their phone died.
Right. And the boss with the flat expression might just have a migraine. The neurological trigger isn't the reality of the external world, it's the internal interpretation of the threat. The brain registers a potential loss of connection and immediately just sounds a 5-alarm fire.
And we really need to dissect the word dysphoria here. Because in modern clinical speak, we throw words around so casually that they completely lose their weight.
We do. We dilute everything.
You do. But dysphoria comes directly from ancient Greek, and it translates literally to unbearable.
Unbearable. Not uncomfortable, not just unpleasant, unbearable.
Right. Dobson's patients consistently struggle to articulate the sensation because it seems to bypass the cognitive language-producing centers of the brain entirely. It is a wordless, primitive pain.
That makes sense. I mean, if you think about human evolution, being cast out of the tribe meant certain death.
You would freeze or starve.
Exactly. The brain evolved to interpret social rejection as a literal threat to biological survival. So in an RSD episode, that primal circuitry is firing at absolute maximum capacity.
It is a profound, catastrophic loneliness that hits from 0 to 100 in a microsecond.
The speed is terrifying. And the source material features a story that perfectly illustrates how deeply this anchors into the psyche.
The wedding day story.
Yes, the wedding day story. Dodson treated a woman who experienced a devastating, highly public rejection on her wedding day, the ultimate withdrawal of love and respect.
You can't get much worse than that.
Right. And 2 years later, she was in Dodson's office. When she recalled the event, she wasn't just, remembering a sad day. She went into a full, active RSD flashback.
Like PTSD.
Exactly like it. The physiological pain, the chest-clanging agony, the wordless despair, it was just as vivid, just as fresh as the moment it happened 24 months prior. The brain had trapped the trauma in amber.
And when you were trapped inside one of those episodes, time loses all meaning.
Yeah.
The prefrontal cortex, which is the logical timekeeping part of the brain, it just goes totally offline.
It shuts down.
It does. So the most critical intervention a person caught in an active RSD storm needs is simply the reminder that the feeling is temporary.
Because their amygdala is screaming at them that this unbearable isolation is their new permanent reality.
And I want to stress this is not a fringe symptom. When Dodson introduced this specific criteria into his screening process, between 90 and 95% of his ADHD patients didn't just agree with it, they had visceral reactions.
Wow. Over 90%.
Yeah. They would stare at him and ask if he had been secretly following them around their entire lives.
Okay, I have to pause here and play devil's advocate for a minute, because this is exactly where a lot of neurotypical people hear this and they just roll their eyes.
Oh, for sure.
They think, nobody likes being dumped. Nobody likes getting reamed out by their manager in front of the whole team. Everyone is sensitive to rejection. You're just pathologizing normal human emotion. So at what exact biological or psychological threshold does a normal reaction to criticism morph into this unbearable pathology?
That skepticism is the exact reason this condition has been ignored for so long.
Really?
Yeah. The difference lies entirely in the baseline state of the nervous system. Think of emotional resilience as a shock absorber on a car.
Okay, I'm tracking.
A neurotypical person is driving on a relatively smooth road. When they hit a pothole like a criticism or a breakup, the shock absorber compresses. It hurts, it's jarring, but the car keeps moving, and the shock absorber resets.
Right, they bounce back.
But an ADHD nervous system is not driving on a smooth road. It is operating at a constant 10 out of 10 intensity. People with ADHD are intensely passionate, highly sensitive, deeply empathetic individuals whose brains are just constantly processing a massive influx of stimuli.
So their shock absorbers are already fully compressed just from, existing in a loud, bright, demanding world.
Precisely. They have zero travel left in the suspension. So when the RSD trigger hits, when they hit that pothole of perceived rejection, there is no buffer. The impact transfers directly into the chassis of the car.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
It instantly overwhelms their system because they are chronically redlining.
Which opens up a massive debate about origins, doesn't it? I mean, if
Yeah.
we are dealing with a nervous system that is chronically redlining, a brain with zero emotional shock absorbers, how does a human being end up like that?
Right. Nature versus nurture.
Exactly. Are we looking at a genetic lottery ticket, or is this the result of a hostile environment? Are you born with RSD, or does the world build it into you?
Dr. Dodson's synthesis of the data suggests it is a violent collision of both. The foundation is undeniable genetic neurology. ADHD is highly heritable.
You inherit the hardware.
Right. You were born with a distinctly wired prefrontal cortex and a dopamine system that functions differently than the neurotypical baseline. You don't wake up on your 18th birthday, blow out the candles, and suddenly possess a standard-issue nervous system. The hardware is lifelong.
But hardware doesn't exist in a vacuum. It interacts with the world, and the world is incredibly hostile to this specific type of hardware.
Hostile is putting it mildly.
The source material cites a statistic that completely stopped me in my tracks. Dr. Delanik, the former chairman of child psychiatry at Harvard, he ran the numbers on the childhood experience of ADHD.
This stat is brutal.
It really is. He estimated that by the time a child with ADHD reaches the 3rd grade, they have received 20,000 additional negative, corrective, or critical messages compared to their neurotypical peers.
We have to really sit with the sheer magnitude of that number. 20,000.
By 3rd grade, that's what, 8 or 9 years old?
Exactly. That is an incessant, daily drumbeat of correction. Sit down. Stop talking. Why are you so loud? Stop touching that. What is wrong with you? Try harder. You have so much potential if you would just apply yourself.
It's not just a parent scolding them once in a while. It's the teacher, the soccer coach, the extended family, the crossing guard. It is a rapid-fire bombardment.
And what is the actual translation of those messages to an 8-year-old brain?
Right, because the child doesn't hear, my dopamine receptors require more stimulation than the standard classroom provides.
No, they don't.
The child hears, I am fundamentally broken. Who I am naturally is unacceptable to the tribe. I'm a bad kid.
And that psychological isolation quickly becomes physical isolation. The source highlights this heartbreaking study by a researcher named Makami. She observed 3rd graders with ADHD in social settings.
And what did she find?
Makami found that 70% of these children do not have a single close friend.
Not one.
Not one. Dodson talks about the parent sitting in his office completely shattered. The mothers aren't crying because their son got a C- in fractions. You can hire a math tutor for that.
Yeah.
They are sobbing because they are watching their child endure a completely friendless existence, never receiving an invitation to a birthday party, always being the last one picked, always being the weird kid that the other parents whisper about.
That is just... It's devastating. And, you know, we tend to conceptualize trauma as this explosive cinematic event, a car crash, a war zone, a physical assault.
Right, the big stuff.
But the reality Dodson outlines is much closer to complex PTSD. It is the death of 1,000 cuts. The neurological trauma of 20,000 rejections literally alters the architecture of the developing brain.
Because the brain is a prediction machine. If 20,000 times you reach out and get slapped, your brain is going to rewrite its predictive algorithms to anticipate the slap every single waking second.
It's like walking around with a severe, full-body, 3rd-degree sunburn. A neurotypical person walks up to you, gives you a hearty slap on the back, and says, hey, man, great to see you.
To them, it's a completely benign, friendly gesture.
But because your nervous system is completely stripped, that slap is absolute agony. So eventually, your brain learns to flinch before their hand even starts moving. You aren't reacting to the slap anymore. You are reacting to the anticipation of the agony.
That state of perpetual flinching is what we call hypervigilance. You are constantly scanning the horizon, reading microexpressions, analyzing vocal tones, looking for the absolute earliest warning sign that rejection is coming.
You're on high alert forever.
And you cannot maintain that level of hypervigilance while acting like your authentic self. The cognitive load is just way too heavy. So to survive, the brain starts constructing defenses.
Right, because if your nervous system is trapped in that state of hypervigilant agony, you can't just exist in the world normally. You have to build a psychological bunker just to survive a trip to the grocery store or, a day at the office.
Dr. Dodson classifies those bunkers into 3 distinct architectural styles, if you will. He argues that because RSD hits so suddenly and hurts so deeply, people with ADHD spend their entire lives structuring their existence to prevent it.
Avoidance becomes their baseline.
Exactly. This avoidance actually dictates their personality. And in this context, personality is defined as a person's set of problem-solving abilities for dealing with stress. He calls these problem-solving mechanisms the three masks.
Okay, let's pull these masks apart because this is where the listener is really going to start recognizing themselves or the people they love. The first mask Dodson identifies is the quitter.
The path of pure avoidance.
Exactly. The internal logic is incredibly simple. You cannot be rejected if you never put yourself in a position to be judged.
The quitter refuses to start any new project, enter any new relationship, or accept any new challenge unless they're absolutely guaranteed a quick, easy, and flawless success.
Which doesn't exist.
Exactly. If they look at a task and perceive even a fractional chance of failure, criticism, or struggle, they simply abort. They will walk away.
And the real-world consequences of this mask are devastating. Dodson points out that these are often highly intelligent, deeply creative people who end up grossly underemployed.
They'll stay in a dead-end, entry-level job for a decade.
Because applying for a promotion requires a resume review, an interview, and the potential for a no.
And a no is unbearable.
Right. They will never ask anyone out on a date because the microscopic possibility of someone saying, "I'm not interested," is neurologically processed as a lethal threat. So they shrink their world down to this tiny, suffocating box where nothing unpredictable can happen.
It is a life defined by intense, agonizing loneliness masquerading as safety.
Man, that's heavy.
It is. And then we move to the polar opposite approach.
Yeah.
The second mask, the people pleaser. If the quitter avoids the world, the people pleaser actively attempts to control it by becoming a chameleon.
This mask is fascinating from a neurological standpoint because it requires massive computing power.
Oh, absolutely massive.
A severe people pleaser can walk into a room full of strangers and run a background algorithm in seconds. They scan the microexpressions, the clothes, the tone of conversation, and they instantly deduce exactly what this specific group of people rewards, what they praise, and what they mock.
And once they process that data, they instantly morph their personality to become exactly what the room desires. They become a flawless mirror.
If the room values humor, they are the comedian.
If the room values stoicism, they are a rock.
But the cost of running that algorithm constantly is the total erosion of the self. If you take a severe people pleaser aside and ask them, forget about your spouse, forget about your boss, what do you want to do with your life? What do you like?
They often draw a complete blank.
They genuinely do not know. Their entire identity has been outsourced to the approval of the external world. Their only internal desire is for everyone else to be happy, because if everyone is happy, nobody gets mad, and the RSD trigger stays dormant.
Which brings us to the most exhausting mask of all, the perfectionist.
Oh.
Yeah. This is the overachiever, the person working 80-hour weeks, the one who color codes their spreadsheets and never ever misses a deadline.
Their defensive logic here is based on flawlessness.
Right. If my work is absolutely perfect, if my appearance is impeccable, if my behavior is beyond reproach, then there is mathematically no surface area for criticism to attach to.
They build a fortress of gold, but Dodson points out the inherent trap here. Today's audience does not applaud yesterday's performance.
Perfectionism is a treadmill that only ever speeds up.
It really is. The perfectionist feels that their acceptance is purely conditional. They believe that their friends, their colleagues, their partners, they only tolerate them because of their utility and their flawless output.
One slip deadline, one burned dinner, one typo in an email, and they are convinced the illusion will shatter and they will be cast out entirely.
It leads to catastrophic burnout. The nervous system simply cannot sustain that level of output while simultaneously scanning for threats.
It's impossible.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If a person spends decades operating as the quitter, the pleaser, or the perfectionist, what happens when they finally seek treatment? What happens when you provide a medical or psychological intervention that actually neutralizes the RSD? The mask finally falls to the floor, and they look in the mirror. Do they even know who is looking back at them?
That is the core tragedy embedded in Dr. Dodson's work. When you remove the RSD, you're often left with a patient experiencing profound grief.
Oh, grief.
Yes. They express a deep, lingering sorrow that they have never been truly loved or chosen for who they authentically are because they believe the world only ever fell in love with their mask.
Oh, wow.
They feel like a fraud whose performance was successful, but whose actual soul remains completely unknown.
How do you even begin to reconstruct a human being from that point? If you ask them what they desire, you get nothing but static.
Dodson uses a brilliant therapeutic technique to bypass that static. He calls it the rocking chair at 85 exercise.
I love this concept.
It's so effective because you can't ask them what they want, so you ask them what they regret. He has them close their eyes, imagine they are 85 years old, sitting on a porch, nearing the end of their life, and looking back. What opportunities do they wish they hadn't passed up out of fear? What relationships do they wish they had pursued?
By projecting them into the future, you remove the immediate present-day threat of rejection. The fear of an unlived life temporarily overrides the fear of a critical boss.
Exactly. And Dodson notes that when patients finally achieve this breakthrough and the RSD lifts, they don't immediately jump for joy. They plunge into a 6 to 8 week period of intense, heavy mourning.
They have to grieve the lost years. They mourn the relationships they sabotaged, the careers they hid from, the sheer amount of mental energy they burned just trying to survive.
It is a necessary death of the old self. But once that mourning period concludes, Dodson observes this incredible flip. The patient transitions into living life boldly, wildly, making up for lost time without the anchor of constant fear holding them down.
That journey of unmasking is monumental. But it requires a guide, right?
Yeah.
A clinician who actually understands what is happening. And this is where the source material pivots from deeply empathetic to clinically enraging.
Oh, completely enraging.
Because when a patient gathers the courage to take that mask off, when they read an article about RSD online and finally feel a glimmer of hope that they aren't just fundamentally broken, they take that vulnerability to their doctor.
And in a tragic number of cases, the medical establishment slams the door right in their face. Patients bring up rejection sensitive dysphoria, and clinicians mockingly dismiss it.
They blame Dr. Google.
Or they tell the patient they shouldn't be diagnosing themselves via TikTok.
Dodson compares that casual, arrogant dismissal to emotionally stabbing the patient in the chest. You have a patient whose literal pathology is an unbearable sensitivity to rejection. They are offering the doctor the most fragile, vulnerable piece of their inner world, and the doctor swats it away with a condescending joke.
It instantaneously destroys the therapeutic alliance. The patient will put the mask right back on, walk out of the clinic, and possibly never seek help again.
It raises the question, why is the medical community so hostile to this concept?
Dodson argues it's because the establishment is heavily invested in a competing paradigm, specifically the executive function deficit theory, or EFD.
EFD, which is the prevailing dogma in ADHD research right now.
Yes. And EFD essentially views the ADHD brain as a broken neurotypical brain. It states that the core issue is a deficit in the brain's management system, the ability to plan, organize, initiate tasks, and regulate emotions.
It treats the patient as damaged goods that need to be trained to act more like a standard factory model.
But Dr. Dodson aggressively dismantles the EFD theory using the psychiatric community's own data. First, he points out a glaring statistical flaw. In massive clinical studies, less than 50% of people diagnosed with ADHD actually exhibit significant executive function deficits on testing.
Wait, less than half? Less than half. You cannot build a defining foundational theory of a neurological condition around a symptom that the majority of the population does not even have.
It's absurd. And furthermore, Dodson points out that therapies designed specifically to train or fix these supposed executive function deficits show absolutely no lasting benefit to the core features of ADHD. You can give an ADHD person as many planners, color-coded calendars, and organizational apps as you want. It does not change the neurological firing of their brain.
The alternative framework Dodson advocates for is infinitely more empowering and accurate. ADHD is not a deficit of attention. That is a terrible misnomer. It is an abundance of attention, an overwhelming surplus of cognitive energy, but it is only accessible for things the nervous system finds genuinely stimulating, urgent, or novel.
The source notes that the average IQ of someone with ADHD is 123.
That is extremely high. Right, that is easily enough cognitive horsepower to earn a doctorate without breaking a sweat. The problem isn't broken hardware. The problem is the ignition system. Neurotypical brains are ignited by two things: importance and secondary rewards.
Like, I need to file these taxes because it is important for my financial future, and the reward is not going to jail.
Exactly. A neurotypical brain can use the concept of importance to generate the dopamine required to initiate a boring task. The ADHD brain simply cannot.
Asking if importance helps an ADHD person initiate a task is like asking if yelling at a car engine helps it start when it has no spark plugs.
That's a great analogy.
Importance is just a nagging, anxiety-inducing voice in their head. It does not bridge the synaptic gap.
So the neurotypical world looks at a genius-level intellect who can't file their taxes and calls them lazy or oppositional or broken. And because of the RSD, the ADHD person internalizes that judgment deeply.
This leads to a horrific cascade of misdiagnoses because doctors are looking at the defensive mechanisms, the masks, instead of the underlying nervous system.
This is particularly stark when we examine the gender split in how RSD presents clinically. Because society socializes men and women differently, the exact same neurological pain manifests in wildly divergent behaviors.
Right. Women, generally speaking, are socialized to shrink, to accommodate, to turn pain inward.
So when RSD hits a woman, she often internalizes it into profound shame, acute anxiety, or deep depressive crashes.
But men are culturally permitted and sometimes encouraged to externalize their discomfort through aggression. When a man experiences that sudden 0 to 100 emotional flood of perceived rejection, his brain doesn't interpret it as sadness. It interprets it as an attack.
And the resulting defensive mechanism is a sudden, explosive, white rage directed entirely at the person or situation that they perceive wounded them.
The statistics surrounding this externalized RSD are truly terrifying. Dr. Dodson discusses an adult ADHD screening checklist that was administered to a group of individuals in court-mandated anger management.
Like for violent offenses.
Yeah, these were men ordered by a judge to attend therapy for road rage incidents, bar fights, domestic disturbances.
And what was the number?
50%.
Half of them.
Half of the people in that court-mandated system tested positive for unrecognized ADHD and severe RSD. Their violence and rage were not calculated malice. They were unregulated, instantaneous neurological detonations triggered by perceived rejection.
When you misdiagnose that, you ruin lives. Clinicians often look at these patients and slap them with a label of avoidant personality disorder.
Which, if you read the DSM criteria for avoidant personality disorder, it is essentially a perfect word-for-word description of an ADHD person wearing the quitter mask.
Or even more commonly, they are misdiagnosed with social anxiety disorder.
Let's draw a massive bright line between social anxiety and RSD, because the mechanism is completely different.
Yes, let's break that down.
Social anxiety is anticipatory. Think of it like being utterly terrified of getting into a car crash while you are still safely parked in your driveway. Your heart is racing. You are sweating. You are dreading the event before it happens.
But often, once you actually get on the highway, the anxiety dissipates. You realize you are fine.
Exactly. RSD operates on the exact opposite timeline. It is not an anticipatory dread. RSD is the airbag exploding in your face out of nowhere while you are cruising at 60 miles an hour listening to the radio.
The event happens, the unreturned text, the perceived slight, and then the bomb goes off.
One is a slow buildup of fear. The other is a concussive, sudden impact.
So treating RSD with standard social anxiety protocols is like trying to fix a perfectly good Mac computer by shoving Windows software into it and then telling the client the computer is broken when it constantly crashes.
The hardware is fine, is running a completely different operating system.
Which brings us to the most critical juncture of this deep dive. If we stop trying to install Windows on a Mac, if we stop treating the brain like it has a deficit, and we start addressing the actual neurological reality of this hyperreactive 10 out of 10 nervous system, how do we actually fix it?
Well, the source hits us with a very harsh reality right at the start of the treatment discussion. You cannot talk your way out of an RSD episode.
Right. Standard psychological therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavior therapy, they are phenomenal tools for many things, but they are entirely useless in the middle of an RSD spike.
The biological onset is simply too fast. CBT relies on the prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning part of the brain, to catch a distorted thought, analyze it, and reframe it.
But when an RSD trigger hits, the amygdala essentially cuts the power cord to the prefrontal cortex.
It's like trying to build a fire break while the wildfire is already burning your kitchen down. By the time the patient realizes they have been triggered, they are already swept away in the flood.
Therefore, prevention is the only immediate cure. You have to intercept the signal before it trips the alarm. And that leads us to the medical armor.
The frontline intervention Dr. Dodson uses isn't an SSRI or a standard ADHD stimulant. He uses a class of drugs called alpha-2A agonists.
And the history of these drugs is wild because they were originally synthesized in the 1960s to treat high blood pressure.
We have nearly 65 years of robust safety data on them. But to understand why a blood pressure medication stops emotional pain, we have to look at the biology.
Standard ADHD medications, stimulants like Adderall or Vivance, they increase dopamine to help with focus, executive function, and distractibility. But they don't touch the emotional dysregulation.
Right, because alpha-2A agonists work on a completely different neurotransmitter, norepinephrine.
Norepinephrine is basically the brain's adrenaline. It fuels the fight or flight response. The alpha-2A receptors in the brain act like a thermostat for this chemical.
When the nervous system is running at a 10 out of 10, the thermostat is broken. It's just flooding the brain with panic juice at the slightest provocation.
The blood pressure medication binds to these specific receptors in the prefrontal cortex and essentially tells the brain, hey, we have enough adrenaline up here, shut the valve off. It chemically turns down the baseline volume of the central nervous system.
Dodson has developed a very specific, highly targeted intake process before prescribing this armor. He uses 4 distinct screening questions to identify if a patient's unique neurology is a match for the drug.
Question 1 is straightforward. Do you strongly identify with the definition of RSD? The visceral, sudden, unbearable pain of rejection.
Question 2 is fascinating, though. Are you a night owl? Specifically, he is looking for delayed sleep phase syndrome.
Do you suddenly feel clear, energetic, and alive when the sun goes down? Is your natural desired sleep window from 4 a.m. to noon?
And if you try to force yourself to sleep at 10:00 like a neurotypical person, do you lie in the dark while your brain plays a high-definition Technicolor highlight reel of every embarrassing mistake you've ever made since the 3rd grade?
Oh man, the 2.0 a.m. highlight reel. That is a hallmark of the overactive sympathetic nervous system trying to process the day's stimuli without any external distractions to drown it out.
Exactly. Then question 3 explores the structure of their thinking. Do you have 3 to 12 completely separate thoughts occurring simultaneously?
Notice the phrasing there too. Not jumping rapidly from one thought to another. That is standard distractibility. This is parallel processing.
It is the experience of having 5 different radio stations playing at equal volume in your head at all times. It is a cacophony of simultaneous cognition.
And finally, question 4, which is perhaps the most tragic. Have you ever, in your entire life, felt a sense of true mental and physical peace?
The answer from an unmedicated ADHD patient is almost universally, unequivocally, no.
Unless, maybe, they are standing completely alone in the middle of a forest, miles away from human judgment. The internal engine never stops revving.
If a patient fits this highly specific profile, Dodson initiates a trial of the alpha-2A agonists. And the data is remarkable. About 30% of patients experience profound, life-altering relief from the very first formulation they try.
30% right out of the gate.
Dodson describes it as a light switch flipping. Suddenly, the static is gone. And if the first drug doesn't work, he tries a second molecule in the same class, capturing another 30% of patients.
That is a 60% success rate for giving these patients an invisible shield. The rejection still happens, bosses will still be rude, texts will still go unanswered, but the drug prevents the physiological detonation. The arrow hits the armor and bounces off rather than piercing the heart.
But that leaves 40% of the population out in the cold.
The alpha-2A agonists do nothing for them. What happens to the remaining 40%?
For that deeply suffering minority, Dr. Dodson has to reach even further back into the psychiatric archives. He utilizes MAOIs monoamine oxidase inhibitors.
These were the very first class of antidepressants ever developed, dating back to the 1950s and 60s.
They're incredibly powerful, broad-spectrum agents that effectively block the enzyme responsible for destroying serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine in the brain.
But there is a massive, glaring reason why a modern doctor will look at you like you have 3 heads if you ask for an MAOI.
They come with terrifying baggage.
Serious baggage. MAOIs block the breakdown of an amino acid called tyramine. And tyramine is naturally found in delicious aged foods. We're talking aged cheeses, cured meats, salami, soy sauce, draft beer, certain wines.
If a patient on an MAOI eats a charcuterie board, the tyramine builds up rapidly in their bloodstream. Because the enzyme that normally breaks it down is blocked, the body desperately converts all that excess tyramine directly into adrenaline,
which triggers a catastrophic hypertensive crisis. Blood pressure spikes to stroke level instantly. The source material notes that in the mid-20th century, before this dietary interaction was understood, there were historical cases of people eating cheese, having massive strokes, and dying.
And the danger isn't just culinary. You absolutely cannot mix MAOIs with modern SSRI antidepressants or even over-the-counter cough medicines containing dextromethorphan.
Doing so risks serotonin syndrome, a potentially fatal condition where the nervous system is overwhelmed by serotonin, causing muscles to lock rigidly, fevers to spike, and seizures.
Modern psychiatrists who were entirely trained on the safety and ease of SSRIs like Prozac and Zoloft, they avoid MAOIs like the plague. They don't want the liability.
But Dodson is a pragmatist. He points out that if you have an educated, compliant patient and an experienced clinician who knows how to manage the diet, MAOIs are astonishingly effective for treatment-resistant RSD.
He specifically highlights a drug called tranylcypromide. From a molecular chemistry standpoint, tranylcypromide is only one single atom different from an amphetamine molecule.
It provides the focus and dopamine of a stimulant, combined with the heavy-duty emotional shielding of an MAOI.
But when patients do not have access to Dodson's level of expertise, when they're denied the alpha-2A agonists or the MAOIs, they're left drowning in that 10 out of 10 intensity.
And human beings cannot survive in a state of constant, unbearable agony, so they find their own armor, they self-medicate.
This unveils a deeply tragic irony regarding addiction within the ADHD community. When we think of a neurotypical addict, someone abusing cocaine or alcohol, they're generally using the substance to chase a high. They want euphoria, they want to party, they want to elevate their baseline.
An individual with ADHD is rarely chasing a high. They are desperately chasing the low.
They use heavy depressants like alcohol or marijuana in a frantic attempt to artificially sedate their multi-track brain.
They are drinking half a bottle of whiskey not to have fun, but just to turn the 5 radio stations down to a single hum so they can sit on the couch without vibrating out of their skin, or just to achieve a few hours of dreamless sleep.
I think we have to pause and ask the most glaring question of this entire deep dive. We are in an era of unprecedented medical advancement. We have mRNA vaccines. We are editing genomes with CRISPR. We have AI mapping proteins. Why on earth are we relying on 65-year-old blood pressure pills and incredibly dangerous cheese-restricted antidepressants from the 1950s to treat an agonizing condition that affects millions of people today?
Why isn't pharma rushing to synthesize a targeted modern cure for RSD?
Because of the foundational nature of modern scientific research and funding. To get a clinical trial approved, to get a paper published in a prestigious journal, to secure millions in grant money from the NIH, researchers need data that is easily quantifiable. You need metrics you can put on a spreadsheet.
You can put a hyperactive child in a room and have an observer with a clipboard count exactly how many times the kid gets out of their chair in 60 minutes. It's objective.
Exactly. You can run standard deviations on chair leaving. You cannot put a clipboard in someone's soul and count an internal, invisible feeling of wordless despair.
Because RSD is a completely internal, subjective, emotional experience, it defies easy statistical analysis.
Therefore, it is deemed unscientific by the major research institutions. They ignore it because studying it is messy and doesn't lead to clean, publishable graphs.
Which leaves rogue, old-school pioneers like Dr. Dodson completely isolated. He has to dig through the dusty archives of mid-century psychopharmacology, leveraging off-label legacy drugs just to piece together some basic emotional armor for his patients.
But that armor is vital. It stops the immediate bleeding. The medication lowers the baseline from a 10 to a manageable 4.
The triggers still happen in the environment, but the medication acts as a chemical shock absorber.
But here's the reality check. Medication only fixes the biology. It provides the armor. But underneath that armor is a human being who still remembers those 20,000 negative comments.
A pill does not erase the trauma of being a friendless third grader. A pill does not rebuild the relationships you sabotaged while wearing the quitter mask. How do we fix the human being once the neurology is stabilized?
You cannot pill away trauma. To address the profound PTSD-like wounds of a lifetime of rejection, you have to engage in specialized trauma-informed therapy. Dodson explicitly points to somatic therapies, particularly EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and reprocessing.
EMDR is fascinating because it doesn't just rely on talking. It uses bilateral stimulation eye movements or tapping to essentially force the brain's information processing system to unstick the trapped trauma.
It takes that memory of the wedding day rejection that is trapped in amber and processes it out of the amygdala and into standard historical memory where it belongs.
This deep therapeutic work is absolutely critical when we look at how RSD detonates within romantic relationships. The fallout isn't just limited to the person with ADHD. The tragedy of untreated RSD is that the non-ADHD partner inevitably becomes collateral damage.
Right, because if you are married to someone whose emotional state can go from a serene 0 to a violently weeping or raging 100 based on a slightly misplaced tone of voice, you cannot act naturally around them.
The non-ADHD partner ends up having to walk on eggshells constantly. They begin analyzing their own sentences before they speak. They stifle their own authentic reactions, swallowing their own frustrations, just to avoid tripping the wire of their partner's explosive RSD.
It creates a toxic mirroring effect. The ADHD partner is wearing a mask to please the world, and now the non-ADHD partner is forced to wear a mask just to survive the living room.
It drains all the spontaneity, the raw honesty, and the gentleness out of the partnership. Specialized couples therapy, therapy that explicitly understands the mechanics of RSD, is the only way to dismantle that bomb and create a space where both individuals can drop their armor.
And the anxiety surrounding this dynamic doesn't stop at romantic partners. It bleeds heavily into parenting. To the end of the source interview, the host fielded a question from a listener that was just dripping with parental terror.
A mother called in. She has a 12-year-old daughter recently diagnosed with ADHD. This mother, having just learned about the devastation of RSD, is paralyzed.
She is terrified that if she implements normal, everyday parenting, like please clean your room or you can't talk to your sister that way, she is going to inadvertently give her daughter RSD and traumatize her for life.
It is such a palpable, heartbreaking, and entirely logical fear. If criticism causes the trauma, how can you possibly parent a child without correcting them?
But Dr. Dodson's response is the most definitive, reassuring moment of the entire transcript. He states unequivocally that parenting style does not cause ADHD and normal parenting does not cause RSD.
The neurology is the neurology. You are born with the hyperreactive prefrontal cortex. Parents are officially off the hook for the biological wiring. You cannot cause it by asking your kid to unload the dishwasher.
However, while parents do not dictate the biology, they are the ultimate arbiters of how the child learns to navigate it. Dodson wasn't just interested in the tragic cases. He actively studied well-adjusted, highly successful adults with ADHD.
He wanted to reverse engineer their resilience. What did the thriving patients possess that the struggling patients lacked?
And he found a single, universal common denominator. Every single adult who successfully integrated their ADHD and managed their RSD had one thing in their past: a trusted figure in their childhood.
It didn't even have to be a parent. It could be a grandparent, an incredibly perceptive soccer coach, a band director, or a high school English teacher.
But this trusted adult delivered a very specific, consistent, three-part message to the child over and over again.
This three-part message is the psychological antidote to the 20,000 negative criticisms. It is the foundation of resilience. I genuinely think everyone listening to this needs to write this down, whether you have a child with ADHD or just interact with human beings.
Part one of the message. I know you. I see who you really are. You are a profoundly good, hardworking person. This struggle is not a flaw in your character, and if anyone on earth has the strength to overcome it, it's you.
It establishes unshakable baseline validation. It separates their worth from their symptoms.
Part two. We don't know exactly what this condition is yet. It is confusing and it is hard, but we are going to study it, we are going to figure it out, and we will master it together.
It provides a roadmap and removes the mystery. And then part three, which Dodson argues is the most vital piece of the puzzle. Until we figure it out, no matter how hard it gets, I will be with you. You are not alone.
You are not alone with an unsolvable problem. That is the magic phrase. That trusted adult essentially volunteers to act as the external keeper of the child's inherent goodness.
Because the ADHD brain, under the assault of RSD, will constantly forget its own worth. When the child fails a test or loses their temper and is convinced they are a monster, that adult is standing there holding the memory of their goodness for them, handing it back to them until they are strong enough to hold it themselves.
That is how you break the cycle of generational trauma. It prevents the child from absorbing the narrative of the bad kid. It allows them to eventually internalize that external voice of hope, transforming it into their own internal monologue of self-advocacy.
Ultimately, the entire project of treating RSD, the blood pressure meds, the MAOIs, the EMDR, the three-part message, is about achieving balance. Dodson uses a physical object in his home to remind himself of the stakes.
The magnet on his refrigerator.
Yes. It's a photograph of the majestic, terrifying peak of Mount Everest, and the caption underneath reads, "Remember that all the corpses on Mount Everest were once highly motivated people."
It is a dark, arresting image, but it is brilliant. People with ADHD, driven by the whip of rejection sensitive dysphoria, are constantly pushing themselves into the death zone.
They are climbing their own emotional Everest every single day, exhausting their nervous systems, burning out their adrenals, sacrificing their authenticity, all just to achieve some conditional, fleeting acceptance from a world that doesn't understand them.
They are striving for a flawless perfection just to avoid the unbearable pain of rejection, and it is literally freezing their spirits to death.
The ultimate goal of recognizing and treating RSD is to give them the neurological and psychological permission to climb down off that freezing mountain, to take off the heavy gear, and to just live a life in warm, sustainable balance.
So to you, the learner listening to this deep dive right now,
Mhm.
if you are walking through this world with an ADHD brain, please let this sink in. You are not a broken version of normal. You do not suffer from a deficit of character. You are not a bad kid. You simply possess a highly tuned, fiercely intense nervous system that requires a specific instruction manual, an instruction manual the world neglected to give you.
And if you don't have ADHD, you now have a profound scientific window into the invisible emotional storms that your friends, your coworkers, or your spouse might be fighting in total silence every single day.
Understanding this invisible storm changes the fundamental architecture of human empathy. But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as we conclude. A thought that builds on Dr. Dodson's clinical insights, but pushes us into a slightly different, deeply philosophical territory. We spent a long time discussing how RSD forces people to construct these elaborate masks, the pleaser, the perfectionist, and how tragic it is that they feel the world only ever loved the mask.
Yes, the tragedy of being a successful fraud.
But consider the actual mechanics of why that mask was built. If your mask was constructed entirely out of a desperate, profound desire to make other people happy, to anticipate their every need, and to keep the people you love safe from the unpredictable chaos of your own internal storm, isn't the construction of that mask itself an act of deep, albeit tragic, love?
Wow.
And if you can view the mask not as a deception, but as a desperate act of protection for the people around you, how might acknowledging the immense aching love behind its creation change the way you finally forgive yourself for wearing it all those years?
That is a beautiful, staggering reframe. It leaves us with a reality that is jagged, murky, and incredibly complicated, but so much more human and true than a simple black and white diagnostic x-ray. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take this knowledge out into the real world, look past the masks, and we'll catch you on the next one.